Here. So, in today's video, we are going to be talking about what to expect from the rate cuts coming from the Federal Reserve here at this meeting. And most people are anticipating or have really already priced in an interest rate cut of around a quarter percentage point, which is fairly typical of an interest rate move coming from the Federal Reserve. Now, a lot of times what we hear from the mainstream media is how the Federal Reserve is forced into this position and how they have to deal with the failing economy, how it is that the labor market is weakening, and at the same time we have this overwhelming inflation that seems to be a thorn in the Federal Reserve's side as they try to deal with monetary policy in a typical fashion of interest rate adjustments. Now, to understand the Federal Reserve is really a very difficult, esoteric, very I don't know, obscure way of trying to understand inflation, understand interest rates, understanding banking finance, understand all kinds of international transactions that are happening. It makes the whole thing very overwhelming and very confusing. And so a lot of times people will just go down to the simplest form of understanding the Federal Reserve, and that is Fed lowers interest rates, that stimulates the economy. Federal Reserve raises interest rates, that restricts the economy. And that's pretty much left at it. That's it. That's all that people will take into consideration. And so to understand that the Federal Reserve can lower rates but still maintain a restrictive economy is very important to then internalize for your understanding of how it is that you are going to conduct yourself when it comes to retirements, your business model, even just your daily life of working and, making the decisions to buy a car or something like that. The Federal Reserve, when they adjust interest rates, it will take anywhere from 6 months to a year before that really starts to impact the economy. But the reaction from the markets based on the information is almost instantaneous. And now we see that through the narrative that is even being deployed right now about how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be lowering rates at the next meeting. It's guaranteed. It's baked into the cake at this point that there is no way anywhere in the realms of possibility that the Federal Reserve is going to do anything other than a quarter point interest rate cut. Now, to know that this information was essentially given to the markets, pushed to the markets to believe, to know for a fact that it's going to happen with no other certainty in mind other than that quarter point cut, that has now been priced in. It's as if it's already taken place. If they were to do something different, like not do the interest rate adjustment, that would shock the markets. It would have a completely opposite effect, and you would find that the market's turmoil would start to take place as they unwind the position of an interest rate cut. You see what they're doing here? They deploy the information in order to get the power out of it. This is how they conduct their monetary policy now. That interest rate adjustment, again, we'll notice that 6 months and a year down the road. But as far as the immediate impact, that comes from the expectations of the market and what it is that they feel that the Federal Reserve is doing. Now, to understand over on the Federal Reserve side, there is something completely different taking place when it comes to that interest rate adjustments, because most people are going to take into consideration that interest rate adjustment is stimulating the economy. It's supporting the rich people. It's pushing the inflation higher. They're doing it out of desperation to save the labor market. This is the general expectations that people are going to receive when they hear about the interest rate adjustment. But the reality is much different for the Federal Reserve. See, they're sitting in a position in which that the Fed funds rate is now above a neutral position. And I know I bring this up regularly on this channel, but it's very important to internalize this, to know that when the Federal Reserve is lowering interest rates, they are not lowering it into accommodation. They're lowering it into less restriction, and that is a huge difference. See, as most people will then think, oh man, if the Fed lowers rates, that's going to make it easier on me. That's going to make it easier on the business, easier on, getting a loan for a house. It makes it all this easier, but ultimately when they lower rates, they're not making it easier. They're making it less restricted. And that's a difference between what it is that people have received for information about the interest rate adjustment and the reality of what it is that's taken place within the economy. Now, to know what it is that's actually happening between the societies, because you have a working class society and then you got essentially an asset holding. Sorry about that, guys. Had the Wi-Fi on. It's probably horrible connection going through that. But ultimately, now we have two different, groups of people. One of them who is working every single day, trying to earn enough with their hourly wages in order to pay the bills, and then you have a whole other group of society who is essentially seeing their assets swell in value, watching the higher interest rates pay a bigger return on their capital investments, and they are doing quite well within the economy. And here you got a whole bunch of people out there who are screaming the pain. So why is it that we have two different things happening here for two different groups of people? One, the asset holder seems to be doing quite well. The resilient economy, the resilient consumer, the power of the American economy, and then yet here you got 80% of the people out there going, man, why is this so difficult? Why is it hard? Why is it that this day job doesn't seem to pay enough? Why is it that I have to, sacrifice my living standard in order to just even make it through the end of the month, if I can even make it through the end of the month? These questions start to come up when you have people who are really misinterpreting what it is that's taking place out there. I mean, I even see it within the statements of the famous economists out there who are talking about the inequality that we are now experiencing, and then they blame it on the attitudes and the belief systems of the rich elite, and not really recognizing it from the underlying economic force that has now driven the new money into the system that separates the rich from the poor. I think about it. It was just like, well, why is it that these supposed famous economists are doing the blame game on a particular group of people out there, saying, oh man, it's their attitudes, the way they set the system up, the way they conduct themselves that keeps the separation going. And I think to myself, why is it that they keep blaming these people instead of recognizing it for the underlying economic force of new money coming into the system that is going to always do this? And it dawns on me that those rich economists out there, they want to remain rich. And the last thing they want to do is blame themselves for the luxurious experience that they are getting. That's the difference inside of it. Nobody who is living it up right now, who has a, decent way of living when it comes to having many homes and cars and all the other businesses and all this money rolling in, there is no way that they do not want to enjoy that. There's no way that they don't want to enjoy that. And when they enjoy it, they're moving into a luxurious experience. As they enjoy that luxurious experience, that is actually creating the horribleness that most people are now experiencing within this economy. As a working class individual, the last thing they want to do is blame themselves for creating the situation. Instead, they would much rather focus on somebody else's attitude about it and blame them for the situation that we now face within it. But it ultimately comes down to the luxurious experience that the rich elitists are now conducting themselves with. And I don't care who they are, if they have the money and they have the position and they are enjoying that money, they are part of the problem. There's no other way of looking at it. Now, don't get me wrong. They are going to enjoy it. They are going to try to increase their wealth as much as possible so that they can raise their standard of living. They will do that because that is human nature. There is no way to stop that. And to think that you can by blaming somebody else and saying, oh, well, I'm rich and I moved myself up into luxuries, but I know that it's their fault out there on why it is there's such a separation between the rich and the poor, but I guarantee you it wasn't me moving into a luxurious higher standard of living. That's what you hear coming from most of those rich elitists out there. Those rich economists who say, oh man, I'm here for the working class individual. I'm here to, help out and try and provide a new system or a way of system in which that everybody can be singing kumbaya, but the last thing I want you to do is take my wealth from me. Go home, listen to every single one of them. Not a single one of them is going to bring up how it is that the ever-increasing amounts of new money that is poured into the system that has created the separation between the rich and the poor is because of the rich elitists move into a luxurious experience. And most of the economists who describe the economy are rich elitists who have moved into a luxurious experience. They do not want to blame themselves. They will think of everything else in the entire world to blame but themselves, not realizing that when you increase your industriousness and you postpone your increase in expenditures and you move that extra money into some sort of secured rate of return beyond that of your occupation, you will separate yourself. The more you do it, the more separation begins to take place. Those who are planning on working a day job in order to maintain their existence will never move into the luxurious experience that those of the asset holders will do. There's no way that they can do it. They cannot earn enough with their day jobs in order to create that higher standard of living by moving into a luxurious experience. That is only for the asset holders now. There was a time in this country working a day job would have given you the ability to raise your standard of living, to have the house, have the car, have the wife, the kids, the retirement, the college funds, all the other stuff that could have came from the day job that does not exist in this day and age. That is only for the asset holders now. Unless you just want to go into an extreme amount of debt. That's the other thing, right? So you can take out debt for this luxurious experience and send yourself down into the abyss, or you can take out debt by cash flowing assets and put yourself on the other side of the wedge. This is how it's going down. There's no other real way of looking at it. I mean, people can fabricate all kinds of creative ways of describing what it is that's taking place within the economy, but the way that I am describing it is exactly to a T what is happening. There is no way around it. At this point, there's literally nothing that anybody can do. There's no fixing it. There's no economist out there who can come up with some grand illusion idea of how it is that the people out there could conduct themselves to create a better way, because it will not happen. I guarantee you it won't. The very person who says that those people out there can conduct themselves better to make a different way of life for the working class individual, I guarantee you will not cut back on their living standards. They will not cut back on their luxurious experience. But they will point the finger out there and blame everybody else out there for the reasonings that we have this separation. But they won't look at their own self, their own, conducting of their life in a way that elevated their standard of living and then blame that. They will not. And so with the unfortunateness of that to take place, they will look and come up and create and describe so many other ways of how it is that the separation has taken place, but they will not blame the true nature of it, which is the new money that has come in and the people who have first access to that new money, what it is that they are doing with it. That's the problem that we now face and we are going to face going into the future. I don't care what they do with these interest rates. The working class individual is not coming back to this economy. Not in any kind of way, shape, or form that's going to bring any kind of decent living standard. Now, you might have a day job, but if you are going to want anything else inside of your life, you're going to have to do so much more beyond that day job. Okay? You're going to have to cut back on expenses. You're going to have to deploy that extra money into some sort of return. You're going to have to do side hustles, start businesses, get more education. Those are the things that the regular, average, everyday dude is going to have to do now, or person, I shouldn't say this guy, but everybody is going to have to now do that these days in order to try and even just keep from falling away, just to keep from falling into the abyss. You're going to have to do all those things. And most people are like, man, that sounds like a horrible experience. Can't you come up with something that is better or easier for everybody to do? No, I can't. I can't, because I don't create this situation. I just recognize what it is that's happening here and what it is that I know I would have to do in order to survive this, because I'm describing exactly what it is that I am doing and what I suggest other people to try and do as well. All right? Cut back on your expenses, increase your income, deploy that extra money towards something that is going to have a return in the future. How you figure those things out is really up to you. Get creative. because there is no fixing this. There's no solving it. I laugh when I see some of these articles, about what it is that they think that the Federal Reserve is up to, how it is that they think they're conducting themselves. The Federal Reserve ran out of ammunition back during the Great Financial Crisis. I have described that so many times. They have switched from using interest rate adjustments to using words to guide the markets. Now, in order to use their words, they had to have the interest rates elevated up off the zero lower bound. The only way to do that was with elevated inflation and inflation expectations. COVID, war, threats of tariffs and more credible threats of even more tariffs going into the future elevates the inflation and the inflation expectation. Because of that, all that has taken place, we now have a Federal Reserve with an elevated interest rate up off the lower bound of zero with a persistently high inflation expectation, which is very much something that they wanted for the economy, for their monetary policy, was an inflation expectation that was persistently too high rather than too low. That right there has given them the ability to now use their words with the most power possible. If they were operating with the Fed funds rate at the lower bound of zero, it wouldn't work. None of them would work because you can't deploy messages about interest rate adjustments if there's no possible way to adjust interest rates. All these people talking about quantitative easing and how the Federal Reserve is going to be firing off the printing press again, I have a very little doubt in my mind that that will not be taking place anytime soon. Quantitative easing happens at the lower bound of zero when they have no room for adjusting interest rates. Forward guidance is a ploy to deploy, is a tool to deploy during zero interest rate policy because they have no interest rate adjustment possible. Forward guidance is by far the only tool that would be available to the Federal Reserve when they have no interest rate adjustment. Now they have interest rate adjustment. Why would they deploy forward guidance? Why would they use quantitative easing? Those are tools to use when you do not have any room to adjust rates. That's why people are missing this. This is why most people are going to miss what it is that the Federal Reserve is truly attempting to do. See, even think about like the idea of tariffs trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Do you know how delusional of an idea this really is? You know how difficult that would be? To actually bring manufacturing back to this country in any kind of realistic, sustainable way, it would be almost impossible. The only way to really do it is to lower the standard of living to make us competitive against the rest of the world who are wanting to manufacture the same things that we manufacture. We just can't do it. And so when I saw that this was the idea, that they were going to bring tariffs or introduce tariffs in order to bring manufacturers back to the United States, and all these rumors and talks and all the expectation of all this manufacturing coming back to the United States is not working out very well. And now, did anybody ever believe for a second that I thought that it would work? I don't think so. I've never gave anybody any belief or suggestion that the tariffs were going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. But the tariffs did do one thing. They raised the inflation and the inflation expectation, which was definitely a benefit to the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. For those who don't think that Donald Trump and Jerome Powell are like best friends forever, are totally missing the monetary policy and how it is that Donald Trump deploying these tariffs and the credible threat of more tariffs coming into the future has raised the inflation and inflation expectation, which has totally benefited the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. If you cannot see that, then you are going to miss what it is that's about ready to happen here. I describe this regularly here on my channel on what it is that we need to look at. R-star, inflation, the neutral interest rate, the Fed funds rate, and where it's set in relation to the neutral interest rate, whether or not that is restrictive. If this is moving up on the credible threat of more tariffs coming into the future, very few people are going to describe anything like it is that I am describing. And the only reason why I am bringing this up is because this is what I have found researching the Federal Reserve's own words. This is coming from their speeches. I say this over and over again because most of the time when I look out there and I read through these mainstream media articles, very few of them ever clue in on the key indicators that they really need to. Most of the time, they will just, like, they'll just hover on the surface level stuff. And I understand why. It's because they're not really there to try and educate or show the people what the real information is. They're there to tell the best story, because the best story wins. You can see that by my channel here. I mean, the video, I could talk about conspiracy theory stuff and get tens of thousands of views on it, but if I break down a Federal Reserve speech that has very detailed information on it, that is very difficult to absorb and is incredibly esoteric with the information in which that you need to know in order to even absorb that information, nobody's going to watch that stuff. Nobody watches. Like, I mean, the handful of people who do watch it are incredibly thankful for it. They email me constantly. They share the experience that they have had since discovering my channel and taking in this information. They have come to me and said, man, thank you so much for being so consistent out here and sharing this information and being repetitive with it. Because a lot of times it takes multiple times of hearing it from different directions in order to finally absorb it, to get it to click. Right? And I mean, I never change my tune. Like, I go back and I look at videos that I had done years ago, and it's describing the exact same things that I am describing now. My belief about the neutral interest rate, my belief about the Federal Reserve wanting inflation and inflation expectation to raise that neutral interest rate. These things are coming true. It's happening right now, but unfortunately, because most of the mainstream media economists out there only deliver surface level stuff, they will never dive in to get to that deep-rooted information that really is going to give you a much better understanding of the Fed's strategy. Instead of this idea that, oh, the Fed is screwed, they need to do something about the labor market. And it's like, man, do you guys not see it? That the Federal Reserve had lost control of the monetary policy with interest rate adjustments back in the great financial crisis, when unemployment fell to historically low levels and failed to produce an inflationary scenario for the Fed. The Fed went, oh no. Now what do we do? All right. That was literally, the Fed was like, guys, did you notice that unemployment hit historically low levels and it didn't produce the inflation we wanted? Anybody else noticing that? Yeah? It's cause for concern, right? Major cause? Okay. What are we going to do? What are we going to do, guys? We got, unemployment here at historically low levels, and it doesn't produce the inflationary scenario. This is bad. This is really, really, really bad. So how we fix this? Oh, well, there's this makeup strategy. Maybe we can let inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time to make up for the fact that we failed to produce an inflationary scenario over the previous 10 years. Do you think maybe this makeup strategy might be able to do something to get our ammunition back, get that inflation up off the below target range that we are now facing? Maybe let it run extra hot, and then we can make up, that makeup strategy. And then COVID hits, and all of a sudden inflation just runs rampant. And they were like, oh, that makeup strategy? COVID kind of made that irrelevant. We don't need that anymore. Thank you, COVID. Right? And people say, oh, no, it ran way fast, way more than the Fed could ever imagine. It was hard. It was bad. They didn't know what to do about it. And I'm thinking, no. It might have been bad. It might have been worse than what they were planning on doing, but it certainly didn't hurt them. That didn't hurt them. That gave them all, they were like, whoa, man, it worked way better than we thought it was going to, did it? That COVID was exceptional. Exceptional. It totally ruined everything within the economy and created inflation expectation beyond belief. Totally got the ammunition back. Thank you, COVID. That's what the Federal Reserve is thinking. I mean, think about it. Otherwise, they had to come up with this whole other strategy to convince you that it was okay to let inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time. Go and do the research yourself. It's called the make-up strategy. Federal Reserve make-up strategy. Right? It's from 2020. They literally had a game plan to deploy music videos, social media posts, commercials, all kinds of stuff. They were going to go on talk shows. They had all of it planned out on how it was that they were going to deliver this information, because they knew for a fact that people were not going to go and listen to the Federal Reserve on purpose. So they were going to force feed the inflationary scenario right into the people. COVID hit. They didn't need to do anything. COVID did the entire job for them. They sat back and they were like, man, did that not work? As good as we could ever have hoped for. I know very few people are going to see it that way, but that is the literal truth. Just go and research it yourself. Go and just, I don't know, maybe take one of the chat bot things, one of the AI chats, and go and Google that with Gemini or something like that. Make up strategy. Federal Reserve needed higher inflation to make up for the fact that they failed to produce an inflationary scenario over the previous 10 years. You're going to find that information out there. You're going to see it just as easy. You know why? It's because it's the credible threat theory. It's the most accurate one. It's the one that says that the Federal Reserve did and achieved and got exactly what it was that they were looking for. I got a $2 super chat. Let's go check that out. I heard I missed one yesterday. I am so sorry about that. Uber QWERTY? Uber QWERTY? All right, $2. Thank you so much. Rate cut is fake. Okay. Yeah, try to be a little cleaner with that. Just saying, we got an algorithm we have to deal with here. I have financial advisors who always want me to stress test my retirement plan. I say God is in charge. Silver has to get to $75 just to be 50-to-1 ratio to gold. All right. Jerome P. in the chat. For individuals who need security and a number, cool. All right. Lucky 7 on them dice on that. Okay. Enemy not an issue for me. Lead and Cantillon blood levels was kind of high for a while. All right. Your channel has been a big help to me. Thank you, UE. Well, Rusty, Bumper, Classics 6342. I really appreciate it. And, I want to thank you guys for, sticking it out with the channel for as long as you have. I mean, I know that I went way out on a limb when I started talking about how the Federal Reserve and the money printer wasn't causing the inflation, and then everybody rolled their eyes and started leaving the channel. I know for a fact that if I had not seen the lumber industry the way I did, I would not have been able to call it like that. Right? I know, because again, looking at the lumber industry and watching the lumber industry deteriorate, watching the inventory levels drop, and then watch the demand spike and the prices go off the charts, and people were like, oh man, this is money printing causing this. And I said, no way in the world this is caused from the money printer. This has everything to do with supply and demand. And I knew it then by looking at what it was that I was looking at with the lumber industry, and then studying the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, and knowing that they wanted an inflation expectation to be very persistent within the economy. I called it out right then. I said, no way is this lumber going up due to the money printer. You're going to see it come back down to its normal price, and it's not because of the money printer that prices are moving up. Still to this day, people have a very difficult time trying to internalize that. The message that was delivered about money printer go burr and prices go up was 100% a benefit to the Federal Reserve. 100% benefit to the Federal Reserve. They wanted people to believe in a hyperinflationary scenario because it raised that neutral interest rate up off the... It raised the inflation expectation, which then forced the Federal Reserve to raise that Fed funds rate, which has the neutral interest rate now very elevated. And it's far up off the lower bound of zero. Now, to understand what it is that's happening there is to understand that R-star has not moved much. When you have a low inflation expectation, low R-star, the Fed funds rate is very close to zero and does not give them much room for movement. If you have a low R-star and a high inflation expectation, then you have a Fed funds rate that is quite elevated in order to combat that inflationary scenario. And that gives them the room to adjust rates. That is the power that they need. If they do not have the room to adjust rates, they do not have an ability to talk about it. By raising that up, they were able to regain that ammunition. Now, you think about it, even if the Federal Reserve was to be put in a position in which that inflation fell and deflation started to take hold, they have no room for adjusting rates to stimulate the economy. If the inflation was removed, R star is very close to the lower bound. There is no room for the Federal Reserve to adjust rates to stimulate the economy. It does not exist. Not in this economy. Not here, not now. There is no position in which that the Federal Reserve could lower interest rates to stimulate the economy. It doesn't exist anymore. Nobody knows that. R star is proving that to be the case. If you have elevated inflation, now you have the ability to have an elevated Fed funds rate and the ability to adjust that Fed funds rate. Without the inflation, if you had a deflationary scenario take hold, recessionary pressures kicking in, you have financial collapse taking place, and you have that inflation drop to zero, you have a Fed funds rate that could not stimulate the economy. It would hit the lower bound to zero, and there would be no room to get below that neutral interest rate enough to stimulate the economy. I know that's hard to internalize and wrap your head around, but it is absolutely 100% the case. And I know, I get it, man. Some dude sitting in a Suburban who works at a lumber yard is breaking down monetary theory better than anybody else on the internet out there, and I guarantee you I am. All right? And I don't mean to brag myself up, but I'm going to brag myself up because nobody else is talking about the neutral interest rate. That's what's so frustrating about it. It's like that's the one thing that the Federal Reserve is so focused in on when it talks about monetary policy, and nobody out there who seems to know about monetary policy talks about it. So I don't know what it is that they must be talking about. Because it ain't talking not monetary policy if you're not talking R star, if you're not talking neutral interest rate, if you're not talking the inflationary scenario that's in combination with all those things, you're just talking makeups, you're just making stuff up. It's literally just fabricated, made up information. If you ain't talking about R star, the neutral interest rate, the Fed funds rate, inflation, if you're not combining those things together to form a real view of what it is that monetary policy is, then you're just looking at surface level stuff. $5 from, who is that? Where did it come from? I see the $2 one. Where's the other one? Hold on one second here, guys. Live chats. There it is. All right, from the Pork Chop 1787. Thank you so much for the $5. I really appreciate the support, guys. Okay, what would need to change policy, technology, productivity, demographics to avoid the decline you're predicting? What's your counterfactual scenario? You're not going to like this, man. You are not going to like it because I bring this up every single time in my videos, and it's not something that people like to hear. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, and I'm not going to make it like a pleasant experience for you because that's not the case. I am not in control of creating an economy that is going to be benefiting anybody else out there other than the one that I can control for myself. Understanding it for myself is the only way that I can do this. Now, in order to fix the problem that we now see of ever-increasing amounts of new money that pours into the system that separates the rich from the poor, is we have to literally think of what it is that the Cantillon effect is creating and think exactly opposite of that. If you are an industrious person, hold on here, let me see how much time I got. Okay, I got a little bit of time. If you are an industrious person, right, and you go out there and you have raised your skill level, your education, your abilities, somehow have become more industrious than you were before, and you start getting new money in. That right there is now a moment in time in which that you have to make a decision. What is it that you are going to do? Because there's going to be two outcomes that you can go with, right? One, you can dump that money into a fun experience or whatever, or you can save that money. Now, if you save that money over time, you are most likely going to position yourself in a way that you get a secure rate of return on it. So let's take it back just a little bit. You just graduated high school. You're a up-and-coming municipality. You're an emerging market out there. It doesn't really matter. And then rise of industriousness now has new money coming in. When you bring that new money in, you're going to raise your standard of living. Almost guaranteed. You could postpone that, but you won't. Most people will raise their standard of living, go out, get a nice car, get a better apartment, go get new clothes, go and blast it on a concert. Somehow they're going to increase that, right? That raising of the standard of living right there is a major problem for the domestic manufacturers, because once you have risen your standard of living, now you're going to have foreign competitors who say, hey, you know those products that you guys are making, we can make them a hell of a lot cheaper. And because you have a high standard of living with people who are manufacturing for, doing all the manufacturing, living in houses and driving nice cars and doing all that other stuff, our people are sleeping on the ground. So you want to move your manufacturer over here where you can do it a hell of a lot cheaper? And this is the Cantillon effect. This is something that he described hundreds of years ago, not just something that took place as recently with political, environment and the industrial revolution and stuff. No, this is something that Cantillon was describing hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and he was recognizing it from hundreds of years before that. So this is how it goes down. You increase your standard of living, you are no longer competitive. That's all there is to it. You are industrious. You made a bunch of money, you enjoyed that new money by raising your standard of living, and now you are not competitive. There's somebody else out there who's going to do it a lot cheaper. They may not do it as good at first, but give them some time and they'll get better at it. And eventually, you just won't be able to compete at all. So now, this is the unfortunate situation we face here in the United States, is that we were a manufacturing powerhouse. We produced the world's greatest stuff, and we sent the stuff out there to the world, and the world sent us their money, and we raised our standard of living and screwed ourselves out of our domestic manufacturers. How do you fix that? You got to lower the standard of living. You got to go exactly opposite of what it was that took place that caused the problem. Right? If you raised your standard of living and you moved into luxurious experiences and you started buying foreign production, that foreign production comes in and domestic manufacturers leave. If you have ever increasing amounts of new money that pours into the system, it only becomes advantageous for those who are importing the foreign stuff, the foreign producers, right? The people who are importing that foreign stuff and the people who are selling that foreign stuff to each other. Everybody else suffers the consequence from that because they are not the producers of the manufactured goods that are now attracting that new money. See, when we produced the stuff, sent it out there to the world sent us new money. But now, we don't do it that way. We have to wait for the money to trickle in from people who are at the top, who essentially are getting it through asset allocations and interest payments and, all the stuff that we see as far as like the asset holders acquiring even more wealth, right? They're the ones who are doing the spending. The working class individual can't earn enough to actually go out there and stimulate the economy. This is what the Federal Reserve was noticing with the flattening of the Phillips curve, right? So as the unemployment fell, the inflation should have risen, but it didn't rise because unemployment falling and people going to work doesn't create this stimulating effect within the economy like it once did when we were a manufacturing powerhouse, and the working class individual getting the new money was the consumer. But now it's not that way. The consumer is up at the top 20% of household incomes, those who have the assets, those who are getting the payment on the elevated interest rates. Those are the ones who are doing the consuming. The working class individual who used to be a manufacturing powerhouse isn't doing that anymore. They're essentially flipping burgers and serving beers and driving trucks, but whatever day job that they have, it's barely cutting it. They can barely get through the month with it. It's certainly no extra at the end of the month in order to acquire the things that they would have typically had seen as an American dream. That day is gone. It's out of here now. So there's no fixing it. It's understanding why it's happening. It's happening because of the new money. How it is that people position themselves with that new money. I mean, think about it. How many people go out there and buy a Lexus? Down into the abyss they go. They have to work ever increasingly more hours in order to pay for that Lexus as their standard of living is now deteriorating as the cost of it is going up, right? This is the unfortunate problem that most people end up putting themselves in when they borrow money to buy a luxurious experience. And then you have a whole other group of people who are borrowing money and then buying cash flowing assets with it. Then after they get the cash from the cash flowing assets, they go out there and buy the Lexus. They're sending themselves up onto the upper side of the wedge where other people are borrowing money and sending themselves down into the abyss. It's all about your own personal choice. You can't make people do the right thing. You can't make people not borrow money and not buy luxurious experiences. You can't make people do that. You can only understand that the opportunity for them is there, and they most likely will. And once you see that there's going to be this separation happening, you have to figure out, how is it that I get myself on the other side of the wedge? Because I know for a fact that there is no way that a politician is going to come in and say, hey man, maybe we can bring you some living wage job. No, you can't, right? Because they are not going to lower their standard of living. They are not going to not move into luxuries, and they're not going to try and get more money. Right? So if they say, oh man, maybe we can help you out with some living wage, something like that, you can tell them, don't buy luxuries, don't go and spend that money on fancy things. Take that money and redeploy it back into production of the United States, and only buy that is what is a necessity. Do you think any of those people are going to do it? You think a single politician, any of the millionaires, any of those people are going to do any of that? Do you think any of them are going to be driving a 97 Suburban and then take all their extra money and then deploy that back into manufacturing here in the United States? Or do you think that they're going to take all that extra money and they're going to go and buy some really fun things to do? I mean, right? They're going to go and buy some really fun things to do, because that's what they do. That's how human nature works, All right, what time is it? All right, I got like 5 more minutes here, guys, and I got to call it quits. All right. All right, I forgot the property ladder at 23 and hopped off last year after realizing it was debt slavery scam to prop up rich. F the Joneses. Remember when they raised minimum wage from 385 to 420 an hour? Good times. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I remember when minimum wage was a 425 and I got hired at 450. And all my buddies were like, whoa, dude, you got hired on above minimum wage? And I'm like, yeah, I sure did. And then my first raise was 50 cents, and I was making $5 an hour. And I thought, holy moly, man, I cannot believe that I have this job. This is so good. This is amazing. $5 an hour. Shortly after that, they started raising minimum wage, and I realized that my entire life, as I would work incredibly hard to try and get myself into a position in which that I felt that I could get more money, management positions, trying to drive, trucks, doing whatever to get this more money. Every time I increased my pay, whether it was through, added skills or abilities or position or whatever, I noticed that the minimum wage would shortly be increasing right behind my wage increase, for getting a raise. And so as I thought about this, I'm like, minimum wage is constantly nipping at my heels. No matter how hard I work or what I do, I am increasing my abilities, only to find that minimum wage is constantly right there, this right behind me, right there. I thought, this sucks, man. There's no point in trying that hard if this is going to be the case. I might as well just do the least amount possible that I could get away with in order to acquire what it is that I need, because it's going to be a constant battle against this minimum wage. Like, if minimum wage was still at $5, you know how awesome it would be right now? Right? You know how far above minimum wage that would be? I would be like, oh man, this is absolutely killer. This would be great. But considering where minimum wage is, I'm thinking, man, that you could really go down and get any job and get paid this much money, And I'm like, wow, that's just amazing to me, So it doesn't really matter at this point how much you get paid. The hourly wage isn't enough. I mean, you could be making 3 times the minimum wage, 4 times the minimum wage. It doesn't do anything really for you. All right. Now, granted, it might do somebody who is grown accustomed to making minimum wage, so all of a sudden get 3 times that much money. That little, small group of people who might get to experience something like that they might do pretty well. But for the most part, anybody who is trying to, rent an apartment, do all the other things with it, like, increasing the wages isn't going to give them any more of an opportunity other than maybe, a little bit easier standard of living. But it most likely will not give them a position to buy a house, right? Like, which most people would think would be like, that's what I would like to work towards, is buying property. But if you have an average everyday job, there's nothing like you can do. Like, I did a X post earlier, Graham Stevens had talked about it, saying that back in the day, houses used to be like essentially like these plywood boxes, and now they got all these fancy granite counters and all these fixtures. And so the quality of the house, the actual like material that's in it, all the amenities are far fancier than they were back in the 60s and 70s, where people would just basically construct a shed of a wall, I mean, have some features to it, but for the most part, were just these simple little homes, nothing fancy like they are today. Yeah, you think about it, homes are a luxurious experience. Rich people buy luxuries. That's why homes are luxurious experiences now. Shouldn't be that way. I get you, right? I get it for the people who say homes shouldn't be like that. I totally agree. They shouldn't be like that. But that's what they are. Right? That's exactly what they are. They're a luxurious experience that essentially are now for the rich, because the average everyday job doesn't do it. And all the houses that get built, there's still like very few of them go with the idea that we're going to build the cheapest house possible so that we can sell it to the average everyday dude. It doesn't like, they're going to get priced right out of it by some rich person who's going to go in there and just remodel it to make it fancy anyway. Right? Because that's what's going on now, is the luxurious experiences that are separating the rich from the poor. 20% of household incomes are killing it out there right now, and you can tell because the consumer is relentless. It's not 80% of the people out there, it's 20% of the people doing it. Just think about it. Just go and Google it yourself. 10% of the household incomes are doing 50% of the consumption. That's ridiculous. Right? That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous, small amount of people doing the majority of the consumption. There was a time when the majority of Americans, working class, those were the consumers. They increased their pay, they increased their jobs, they increased their wages, whatever. They went out there, they consumed, they increased the aggregate demand. That was the economy. That's what the Federal Reserve and all the politicians and everybody would focus in on. Nowadays, not so much, right? Not that important. You're important enough to go and drive the truck and flip the burgers and serve the beers, but you're not necessarily important enough to be the consumer. Not anymore. And that sucks. Right. All right. I just downsized my truck so I could put in a sauna and shower in the gym. Damn right. That sounds wonderful. All right. I'm a time traveler. Point A to point B, birth and B death. I'm gonna keep smiling. It's your life. Do what you want. No, not a lot of redos. You'll get what you deserve back. Yeah. Sure, I'm not supposed to do this gig forever, but it's crazy. We do have gigs that really exploit you, and we're all cool with it. Get a better job, you say. Huh. Get a better job. I'm not telling you to do anything, man. You can not do nothing. Right? And in fact, I think it probably, like, I don't know if you're complaining about what it is that I'm suggesting that people do, but ultimately, it's not up to me to decide what it is that you're going to do. Right? Like, I'm not trying to figure out a way for anybody else out there to figure out what it is that they need to do. I'm trying to tell you what it is that I figured out, what it is that I needed to do, and it seems to be working out. And I'm trying to share that experience with people, and I get a lot of pushback for that. So here it is. At this exact time, in this exact economy, I was broke, loser, drunk, nothing going for me, and this was 9 years ago. 40 years old, I had nothing going on. I don't have an education. I don't have a family inheritance. I don't have family business. I don't have any kind of background to bring up and say, hey, man, I have all this experience behind me. What I did is I started studying monetary policy, economics, and I started studying what it is that I was facing as far as the consequences in my life, and I started sharing those things on YouTube. And when I started sharing those things on YouTube, I found a ton of people out there who relate to this information, who then started internalizing some of the things that I was saying. They're coming back to me saying, dude, I cannot believe how helpful you have been. He says, out of everybody else out there that I've listened to, he says, you make the most sense. And I was like, I make the most sense to the working class individual. That's why it makes so much sense. Most of the people who are talking economics, they're talking from such a high level that most people just can't even understand what the hell they're doing because they don't relate to it. Right? And so here they are, 30,000 feet, trying to tell you down on the ground what it is that you're experiencing. And then here it is, somebody who's standing on the ground saying, this is what you're experiencing. Don't listen to them. They don't see it the same way. They're up there 30,000, they're looking way down on these little tiny people down there. It's like, oh, you know what you guys are experiencing down there, let me tell you. You know, it's politicians, it's greed, right? And then you got somebody down here who's going, don't listen to them. This is economic forces. They have nothing to do with this other than their experience with luxuries. That's what they're doing, right? But there's nothing else that they can do that's going to help you understanding why it's taken place. Then we'll give you a position in which that you can deal with. I mean, they can tell you what they're experiencing up there, and you can internalize that, and then, lots of great information, but they certainly couldn't tell you from a working class point of view unless they have done it right here, right now. Because this isn't the same economy that they got rich in. See, they're staying rich in this economy, but they didn't get rich in this economy. And that's hugely different. I'm not saying I'm rich. And I would like to think that I'm going to be at some point in my life. But this journey along the way has been absolutely amazing, and I'm loving every minute of it. Right? And as I see myself putting money away every single month, as much as I can, and sometimes it's not very much, at least I'm putting something away, which was more than I had ever done in the past. And as long as I'm on that path, then I know I'm going to be okay going into the future, because at least I'm positioning myself to get ahead and not fall behind. Again, I don't need all the fancy stuff in my life. I don't need any of that. But it would be nice to have a secure rate of return beyond that of my occupation. And if I can secure that good rate of return beyond my occupation, that's what I'm going for. I don't care about anything else. All right, good point. People are get rich in every economy. America is expensive to live in now. Yes, it is. That's supply and demand thrown off by government intervention in the form of regulations. Yeah. What time is it? Oh, I gotta go. Okay. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for hitting that like button. Thank you so much for them super chats. You guys are always so generous with the super chats and supporting the Uneducated Economist. I can never thank you guys enough. Thank you everybody who has been following me on X. I've been trying to post more stuff there and be fairly regular on X, expanding that social media platform, and Patreon. Thank you guys for being here on Patreon. I'm sorry I didn't get that last speech out. I'm going to break down another one very quickly, and we will have more content there on Patreon for you. Again, I'm using Patreon to go over all the old speeches that we have covered in the past to give it like a new updated idea of what it is that's happening now, considering what it was that they had said in the past. So bringing that information into a new light is pretty critical for our understanding. And then also for those of you who had joined the membership here on the Uneducated Economist YouTube channel, we will be breaking down the most recent speeches coming from the Federal Reserve there on the members only channel. So I try to put the most relevant, the most critical speeches that we can then use for our advantage. I don't want to clog it up with a bunch of useless stuff, although to me none of it's useless. It's all valuable. But really I key in on the monetary policy, because I think that is probably the one thing that us as individuals, working class individuals, can look at, focus in on, understand for our own economy, for our own selves, so that we can be making those appropriate decisions. I find very few people out there on the mainstream media or anywhere else describing what it is that I have described, especially when it comes to like R-star, the neutral interest rate, the Federal Reserve wanting elevated inflation. Most economists have missed all that stuff. So thank you for being here. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.